Donald. And I'm here today in New York, of course, Donald Trump's hometown. But it's not Trump or America we're discussing today. It's our old friend, Jean-Claude Juncker, the man, of course, that David Cameron tried to veto, the president of the European Commission, the High Archbishop, I would say, of Euro-federalism. He doesn't like the Brexit result, I know. He told me to my face a few days after the result. And now he's saying that after tough negotiations, we cannot exit the EU at a discount or a zero cost. No, it's going to cost us 50 billion quid. Here's what he said.
The British must respect commitments they were involved in making, so the bill will be, to put it a bit crudely, very hefty.
Thank you. Which button? Well, when he says it, he probably means it. But think about this. Since we joined the European community 40 years ago, we've actually paid gross £500 billion. Now, there's an argument here about gross and net. We pay money in gross, we get a little rebate. We get money back for fishing, we get money back for farming, we get money back for our universities. But net, we're paying nearly £10 billion a year to be a member of this European Union. The idea that because we've had to leave it, it's going to cost us another 50 billion, I would have thought was outrageous. But maybe you think it's necessary for us to have good divorce terms. Maybe you think we need to go on paying to have trade. I don't know. Call me. Let me know. I wonder, what does Joe in Wandsworth think?
Mr. Nigel Farage. Get you, gadding around the world. Unbelievable. I'm amazed. I'm actually talking to you. Gorgeous. Absolutely, totally gorgeous. Right. What we have to do is refer back to the treaties, because at some point we made a contract to go into the EU, didn't we? So it's a contract. We did, yep. Right. So it's a contract. So what you do is you go and refer back to the contract. One person having his 2 pence, Jean-Claude Juncker that is, another person having their 2 pence is not... What does it say in the contract that we signed? Surely there were terms and conditions for if and when we wanted to leave.
Joe, to be honest with you, up until the Lisbon Treaty a few years ago, there was no provision in this club for any member leaving. Therefore, there was no forethought about money or anything else. I mean, the argument goes that we have what are known as contingent liabilities. We have projects that we've jointly funded that we have to go on paying the costs for. And Mr. Juncker estimates that to be £50 billion. But, Joe, let me put this to you. We voted to leave on the 23rd of June last year. If Theresa May triggers Article 50 on, let's say, the 9th or around about the 9th of March, and we leave 2 years later, even in that period of time, net, not gross, net, we will have paid over £30 billion. So actually, I think we'll have paid most of it by the time we leave anyway. Would that sound reasonable to you?
Not really, because when I pay a bill as big as that, or even a fraction of that, I want it itemised. What are we paying that money for? Is exactly what I'd like to know. And I can't believe that you're pretty much saying, and by the way, I'm a Leave campaigner. I was a Leave voter. I want to know what the money is for. If there's nothing written down as to what we would have to pay in the event of leaving, which there wasn't, and you're right, until the Lisbon Treaty, then I want to know what we're paying for.
Well, Joe, what our Prime Minister could do is to say we're leaving, we're negotiating, and what we're going to do from the moment we trigger Article 50 is stop paying membership fees. She could do that. There's nothing I can see that would stop her doing that. After all, she is the sovereign Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But, Joe, I don't think our political class quite have the guts to do this. So we will have paid in nearly £34 billion at the moment we leave, and they're looking for a total of 50 billion. Or are they looking for 50 billion more than the 34 billion we would have paid. I don't know. Joe, what's it for? It's to run the European Union. It's to fund the farming industry of France far more than it is the United Kingdom. And it's to pay for all the Europeans' projects and big, shiny glass and steel structures. Joe, do you think we should just stop paying the membership fee now?
Absolutely and totally. Yes, I do. Because I want to know what I'm paying for, as are the rest. There seems to be a lot of delusion going on in France at the moment. They're going to take all our business. They're going to, a lot of delusion in that part of the world at the moment. But Jean-Claude Juncker saying that, he's making these grand sweeping statements, and there's nothing apparently written down about it. But as far as I'm concerned, if he cannot justify that huge amount of money, we shouldn't be paying it.
Joe, I agree with you. I thank you for your call. And I would say this, that the Brexit Minister, David Davis, he has said that he thinks maybe after we've left the European Union, we might need to go on paying some kind of contribution to go on trading with each other. And I would like to get your calls on that too. James in Clapham, should we pay Mr Juncker's £50 billion bill?
Nigel, we should pay him absolutely nothing. We should pay him and his fellow little Belgian friends and Luxembourg friends absolutely nothing, because they've got small man syndrome and they need to read Article 50 of the Maastricht Treaty and actually read it properly. Any member state can ask to leave and there will be no penalties issued against that state. That's what it says quite clearly. Is that right, Nigel?
Well, it says any member state can withdraw according to their own constitutional arrangements. And you're quite right. And by the way, one minor correction, James. It's not the Maastricht Treaty, it's the Lisbon Treaty, but that's a bit technical. Ultimately, this whole thing is a negotiation. The British government have not challenged our current level of contributions, and whether we talk gross or net, let's just talk net and avoid any arguments. Net, it's £10 billion every single year, and I would have thought that what the British government should do is to counter Jean-Claude Juncker by saying, we've paid in net £8 billion since we voted to leave. Can we strike that off your £50 billion? Let's see a government, James, that starts to get tough with Brussels. That's what I think.
Nigel, can I just add one point? The rest of Europe, we should actually put on the table as well. And for saving you twice and to stopping a fascist regime taking over continental Europe and losing our empire, that's the bill that you have to pay us.
Well, James, we could do that, but I would suggest we don't go back 75 years nearly with this negotiation. We concentrate on what the British people said very clearly on June the 23rd last year. James, I thank you. Your Facebook messages, Patrick Hall says, £500 billion, yes. And how much did the UK get from access to the single market? It's not a zero-sum game, Nigel. Well, Patrick, I would argue that nowhere else in the world do people think that to buy and sell goods from each other, they have to pay contributions to be a member of the club. In fact, Patrick Hall, I'd say this to you, isn't it bizarre that we pay all this money in so the Germans can sell us lots of motor cars and the French can sell us champagne and wine? Oh, and by the way, they can regulate us, they can overrule us. We've literally been paying for Brussels to take away our independence and much of our business. We have been the mugs in all of this, and it's clear to me that Jean-Claude Juncker thinks we're going to go on being mugs. I'd rather put that to a stop. Liz Weston says on Facebook, blimey, we've been in partnership with loan sharks. I like that. Paul Morgan says, we don't need the EU, but also don't let them hold us over a barrel. It looks like what happens if you leave a doomed scheme. Well, they are in trouble, Paul. Of that, there's no doubt. Graham Tim says, putting it in the nicest way possible, Juncker can put his bill where the sun don't shine. What can he possibly do if we refuse? The answer, Graham, is nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's time we started standing up for ourselves and for British taxpayers' money. Isn't that right, Matthew in Heathrow? We don't need to pay away all this money.
Well, no, I think we do have to. Do have to pay to leave. We already knew that, and basically, if we have to pay 50 billion, I mean, that should give us, say, 5 years of free trade, if that's what you reckon we're paying per year. So if that starts, say, in 2 years' time or whatever, we've got 5 years of free trade with Europe still, and we could still we could try to do free trade deals with the rest of the world. Otherwise, the economy is just going to come to it's just going to shrink so much. If we got that 5-year cushion where we're still paying into Europe, but we're not governed by their rules, we could do the free trade. But also, I mean, basically, we've got to carry on with the work with Europe there.
Well, Matthew, look, I'm here in New York. One of the big conversations, I've been out having lunch with some American businessmen. One of the big conversations here is, when can we get a free trade deal going with the United Kingdom? Fine. But nobody in America is proposing we have to pay a fee to have a free trade deal with the USA. So why on earth, I throw this back at you, why should we need to pay money to have a free trade deal with countries who sell us more than we sell them? Surely they should be paying us money.
Well, I mean, that's what we'll see then, what will happen after the 5 years. But basically, it's like the deal, I'm sure what the government's done with Nissan, to basically say you're not going to be affected by the by the close of the free trade. So, I mean, I think the government then is basically giving us the same deal what they gave Nissan. I'm guessing that they'll basically carry on the free trade for 5 years, and it will give us that cushion, and hopefully then we'll already, at the same time, we start doing free trade deals with the rest of the world. But it's going to take so long to get those deals actually off the ground and working. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to accept it, and I'm sure if everyone works teams together, we can make it work, and it will be better. I mean, we're just paying what we're paying now for the next 5 years, say, and at the same time, you could do your deal with Trump there.
Matthew,
we're away.
Matthew, it would not be worth 50 billion quid for a 5-year free trade deal with the European Union that sells us £80 billion worth of goods more than we sell them every single year. It would be the economics of the lunatic asylum. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. So, my old friend Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, says our exit bill from the European Union is going to be a cool 50 billion quid. And I say my old friend because actually, unlike many of my adversaries in Brussels over the years, I quite like the bloke in a way. I've got a bit of a soft spot for him. Don't agree with his politics, but I quite like the man. But hey, Jean-Claude, haven't we paid enough already? £500 billion in gross contributions since we joined the European Union. A gross contribution today of nearly £20 billion a year. A net contribution every day of about £10 billion a year. That is £30 million a day net the British taxpayer is paying to the European Union. And here's the thing. We're paying it into a club whose accounts have not been given a clean bill of health by the auditors for the last 20 years in a row. Why on earth should we pay him 50 billion quid? We've already, since Brexit, paid in 8 billion quid. If we go on with the 2-year divorce proceedings, we'll have paid in over 30 billion pounds. Yes, there are 1 or 2 joint projects that'll cost some money on an ongoing basis. But if he thinks he's going to present us, after we've paid 30 billion since Brexit, a bill for another 50 billion, well, as far as I'm concerned, he can go and whistle. That's what I think. What does Jenny and Milton Keynes think?
Indeed, whistle. I've read a very interesting bit in the Mail today, and that is that a city lawyers firm, Clifford Charts, I don't know whether you've heard of them,
I have, yeah.
Compiled a report, and they say there is nothing at all in the Lisbon Treaty to cover a payment like that. And even if they try to get money off us under the Vienna Convention, which I've never heard of. Apparently, there is no explicit provision for it under EU law. So John Redwood has waded in and said that the lack of reference to future payment meant it would be illegal for the government to continue to hand over money to Brussels.
Well, Jenny, you make a very important point. Firstly, and our first caller tonight, she made the same point. Firstly, there is nothing in the Lisbon Treaty about continued payments. But your bigger point about the Vienna Convention, that is the convention established internationally for how countries break treaties. And you're quite right, there is nothing in that either. And I think Mr. Juncker, frankly, is behaving in a somewhat desperate way. Yes, there are some ongoing commitments we need to be a part of, but they are absolutely tiddly compared to the £50 billion bill that Mr. Juncker is trying to put upon us. And I would argue, Jenny, the reason he's doing this is not just because they're desperate for money, it's because they're terrified that other countries in their elections this year might start to vote for parties that want to leave the EU. Jenny, my view is they're in trouble, they're scared, it's backs against the wall, and they don't want other countries to follow the UK. Would you agree with that general point of view?
Could I add just one little bit? Clifford Chance have also said that the UK could even claim a share of the EU's assets, which are currently worth 130 billion, because of the UK's financial contributions over the years while a member.
Well, Jenny, that's the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that the EU hasn't yet gone bust. It has some assets, so maybe they should be paying us, because effectively we're selling shares in the club. I'm not greedy. I don't want their money. I just don't want us to go on paying them money. Your Facebook messages coming in quickly. Spider Smith says, when is Nigel going to stop taking EU money? Spider Smith, I was the turkey that voted for Christmas, and as soon as we're kicked out of the European Parliament, I'll stop taking that salary and be happy to do so. Adam Holtby says, Nigel, why should we pay to be in an EU club that disrespects us? Well, that's a subjective judgment, but we're certainly not very popular, are we? Chris Carhill says, scare tactics as usual. The EU need every penny they can get. When we're out, good riddance. Your texts and tweets. All I hear from the EU is bullying, harassment and threats. The sooner we're out, the better. And that's from the Enforcer on Twitter. Nigel, can I quote you? Who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Juncker? That's from Dave. I did do that in a speech. I did ask him, who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Juncker? And however much I've tried to convince Jean-Claude of a different point of view, I have failed totally. So £50 billion, that's what Juncker wants. Sharma in Ilford, should we pay it? Are there some benefits, perhaps, to going on after we've left in paying contributions?
Not a chance. Nigel Farage, I love your show, and I think personally you must be conferred a Nobel Prize for expression of ongoing integrity for I don't know how many years, but ever since I came into this country in 2003, you've been doing great. I'm an immigrant. People think that you don't like me, but I'm sure I'm the type of immigrant you love. Here's my point. Not a penny. In fact, why don't we take a step back, take a deep breath? All the politicians get behind you and ask for opportunity cost. Joining EU has damaged our grassroots thinking in this country. So this is no more a union, is it? It's a loose assembly of even more loser thoughts. So it's an opportunity cost. So how about we ask Mr. Juncker if he could give us anything back to, as a reparation of whatever you would call it.
Well, Sharma, the opportunity cost to us has been that as part of this union, in a world that's been modernising and changing, we've been forbidden from making our own deals with the emerging parts of the world. But I'm not sure we can ask Mr. Juncker to pay us money for that. But I do think there's an argument, Sharma, that given that we're now Germany's biggest export market in the world, maybe the Germans should pay us an annual contribution for us to buy their BMWs, their Audis, their Mercedes and their Volkswagens, at least those that meet environmental standards. Sharma, my point is this. It is a nonsense to say we should go on paying money just to do business with a club that sell us more than we sell them.
I can't agree more. And what about a decent exit clause? I mean, why is all that scaremongering, and why is Mr. Juncker getting personal with Britain's exit? This is a EU. We have entry clause, and as you rightly stated, post-Lisbon Treaty, they've painted a picture of exit. So countries must choose, and people have democratically. I don't know if referendum is democratic, but yeah, we've chosen to come out, so that must be respected. And also, Nigel, I think you dodged my point on Nobel Prize for yourself for expression of integrity to this country.
Sharma, you're very kind and very sweet, and I resent and loathe people that say, I'm against immigrants. I'm not against any immigrants, provided they want to fit in to our culture, our way of life, work hard and add to society, which clearly you have done, and I thank you hugely for your call. But I wonder what John in Islington thinks. John, is it reasonable that we go on until 2023, or in advance of that, paying membership fees or fees to the European Union?
No, I think, like you, I think two fingers to Juncker. I read it this morning, two fingers to him. It'd be a bit of a pain. Go on to WTO and let Juncker argue the whole point out with the German industrialists and the French producers who'll turn on him like anything. And I have a bet myself that you'll still be in the EU and Juncker will be out. I do have one bone to pick with you, though. I can't understand why it should be red meat to Ferrari and Nick Ferrari and yourselves. The LuxLeaks, where two whistleblowers blew the whistle on Juncker and all these dodgy tax deals, and they got a year's jail each for it. It's now before the courts. The appeal is going to be in March. But that was pretty obvious. That was disgraceful what's going on. And also, the Guardian of all papers 2 weeks ago exposed Juncker and Luxembourg for all the sweetheart deals they've done since the two guys were given 1 year's jail sentence. They were two accountants from Price Waterhouse who knew the inside, but nobody seems to have taken it up.
John, Juncker was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg for 19 years. He turned it into a tax haven in the middle of the European Union. I was there last Monday. I filled up, I bought cigarettes. I didn't buy any booze, but I could have done. I mean, cigarettes, there are £4 a packet. They're £9 to £10 in the United Kingdom. Petrol, diesel is much cheaper. And what he was doing was giving the most amazing corporate tax deals of 1 or 2% to big corporations. Juncker has for years had his cake and eaten it. I'm pleased to say that is coming to an end. Your texts and tweets, no way should we pay. Let's be ballsy. We need to be strong and resolute. May is dithering. This one I love. Have you emigrated and moved into Trump Tower? Asks Darryl. No, I haven't, but I will say, Darryl, there are lots of very exciting things happening on this side of the water, including a big annual Conservative Party conference coming up at the end of the week, at which I will be the only foreigner, not immigrant, but foreigner, speaking. EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker is telling us we face a £50 billion bill to leave the European Union. And I'm asking, who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Juncker? We are not going to pay. But before we return to that, an update on John Bercow, the Commons Speaker, who I talked about extensively over the course of the last couple of weeks. And I have to tell you that the bid to oust John Bercow as Commons Speaker appears to have faltered. Just 5 MPs out of 651 have backed a motion of no confidence in Mr. Bercow. The news comes as a third of the public tell pollsters they think Mr. Bercow should quit or be sacked because he's not impartial. This started, if you remember, when he said he didn't think President Trump should come and address the joint Houses of Parliament because in his belief, Trump had said things that were sexist and racist, and then added to that, he told a group of students he'd voted for Brexit, believing it the right thing to do. Parliamentary rules state the Speaker is the chief officer and highest authority of the House of Commons and must remain politically impartial at all times. Well, it mattered for 700 years. Clearly, it doesn't matter anymore. And another of my least favourite public figures, and during the referendum, Osborne was the chief baddie, as far as I was concerned, but Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, was pretty high on the list. But this is interesting. Listen to what Mark Carney said back in May 2016 as the referendum approached.
A vote to leave the European Union could have material economic effects on the exchange rate, on demand, and on the economy's supply potential. So this combination of influences on demand, supply, and the exchange rate could lead to a materially lower path for growth and a notably higher path for inflation.
So it was all going to be a disaster. Project Fair, we were told, from the governor of the Bank of England. Ruin would hit us if we left the European Union, and yet, here's what he said today.
I think it's important to recognize that there are scenarios where this process proceeds relatively smoothly to an increasingly clear endpoint.
Well, there we are. It's getting better. It's getting better. Even the governor of the Bank of England does not think we're ruined as a result of Brexit. I did think he should be sacked. Maybe he's come back on track. Am I getting soft in my old age? I don't know. But I'm not getting soft about Mr. Juncker wanting 50 billion quid after we leave, given that between Brexit and leaving, we'll have paid over 30 billion pounds. I think the whole thing's outrageous. I think we should stop paying anything right now. That's my view. What does Elliot in Tunbridge Wells think?
Hi there, John. Nigel, thank you for taking my call. So you mentioned earlier on that we entered into a number of agreements to jointly finance with the rest of the EU projects that would be of material benefit to the entire EU, which does include us. Is that right?
Well, whether they're of material benefit to us, Elliot, is a point of conjecture, but there are some long-term arrangements that we're part of, and it seems to me that as with any separation, either we come to a capital agreement now, or we have to pay a bit of money into the future. But Elliot, it's not 50 billion quid. That's the point.
If we take that recognition that we've signed an agreement to finance something, right? That's like a finance agreement on a car, say, for example, or a house, right? You've signed a piece of paper.
Well, that depends what those agreements are, Elliot. Yeah, that depends what those agreements are. But we have voted to change our relationship. And what I'm suggesting is we get on and deal with it quickly. Because, Elliot, I think it's ridiculous that during the negotiating period, whilst we work out what our liabilities fairly may or may not be, why on earth are we going on paying a net £30 million every day?
Therefore, that is our liability. So that's what we have to pay. Or do you not think it's right for this country to honour its debts?
Oh, these aren't debts, Elliot, and in many ways you could argue that we're a shareholder of the European Union, which is still currently solvent, so perhaps we should sell our shares and take money back. You can argue this, all ends against the middle. What I am arguing is I want Brexit to be swift. I think most taxpayers will be very aggrieved that from the day they voted to leave to the day we leave, if it stays on course, we'll have paid in over £30 billion. And now Mr. Juncker wants a further 50. It's a figure he's literally plucked out of the air, Elliot. And I'm saying let's have a grown-up negotiation on what our assets and liabilities are.
No, you're not, Nigel. You're saying let's not pay anything. That's not a grown-up negotiation. That's dishonourable behaviour. You are advocating a situation where the UK government becomes like your great friend Donald Trump and doesn't pay their debts and doesn't honour their agreements.
Elliot, I am very happy for us to work out an equitable solution and divorce from the European Union, but I don't see why we need to go on paying money every day before these people will even have a conversation with us on what's right and wrong. Elliot, my suggestion is we stop paying the membership fee tomorrow and we say to Brussels, we're going to be triggering Article 50 in 2 weeks' time. Can we please sit round the table and sort this out? Elliot, I'm calling for action. I'm not calling for the Brits to be dishonourable in any way at all. But I wonder what Campbell in Angus makes of this debate. Campbell, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I completely agree with everything you've said, and I'm a Leaver, and I'm still a Leaver, and I will never change my mind. And all these spanners that keep getting thrown in the works here, this is just a complete perverse of justice. And you know, it's obvious that there are certain minorities that don't like the fact that the majority voted to leave, and they continually keep trying to throw up any old reason to stop us from leaving. And Jean-Claude Juncker with this £50 billion, this is ridiculous. We are not due that money. There's absolutely no way. Like you said, we've already paid in 30, was it trillion pounds you said? Or billion?
Well, I said it's actually 500 billion gross since we joined the common market. But from the day, Campbell, we voted to leave to the day we leave, if it stays on track, it'll be over 30 billion sterling. I think that's too much, let alone this arbitrary figure of 50 billion that Mr. Juncker has plucked out of the air, probably after a very good lunch.
Exactly. And also, I cannot help but think it is only to cover the failings of other members, like, should we mention our friends Greece, who are clearly not managing their debt plan. And, of course, there's also speculation that Italy's also in trouble as well, and that's possibly going to rear its ugly head before the end of the year. Now, obviously, we don't know that that's completely true, but I can't help but think they're saying, well, you know, okay, these guys are leaving, so let's just take what we can from them. And you know, this will help bail out the problems that we'll have in the future. I don't think it's right at all.
They're not just taking our money, Campbell, they're taking the mickey. That's the point. And you talk about the level of Greek debts. I'll say this, not to you, Campbell, but to Nicola Sturgeon. If Scotland had left the United Kingdom and was a member of the European Union, Scotland's public finances are even worse than Greece's. And the idea that the Scottish people would now vote in a referendum to leave the United Kingdom, to join the European Union, to join the Eurozone, I think, frankly, that you must have been drinking moonshine if you think that's even a possibility. Your Facebook messages coming in. Nathan Allen says, Mr. Juncker is on the bandwagon of denial. This is just more fear tactics from the globalists. We should cut loose today and challenge them to come here and try and take the 50 billion. Fighting talk, Nathan. Steve Buckley says, we have to pay because we've signed agreements. Stop with the sensationalist headline-grabbing, misleading arguments. Steve, I'm arguing I want us to negotiate an amicable divorce, but we mustn't have the mickey taken out of us. And frankly, to get these people to the table and to start negotiating, why not stop paying the daily membership fee right now? Texts and tweets, Juncker has proved what a money-grabbing EU club they are. Give them bugger all, says Bob. A tweet here, to think a year ago, all the EU had to do to keep us in the tent was to make some reforms on free movement. They wouldn't do it. Bye-bye. And that is from Gwyneth. Surely the UK owns parts of the infrastructure of the EU, buildings, etc. So we need a refund on this if we leave. Gregory, you're right. We are shareholders in these vast glass and steel structures. They sell us more than we sell them. Maybe they should be paying us money, even after we've left, to access our markets. Maybe this is all completely about face. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively here on LBC, live from New York. It's 7:45. My friend Mr Juncker says we owe him 50 billion quid to leave his failing club, and I think we should tell him where to go. They are being unreasonable. That's my view. What's your view? Jason in Sutton, good evening.
Nigel, I've been listening to you for 50 minutes, banging on about this £10 billion a year that we send to the EU and how bad it is, and it's going to cost us £30 billion before we leave. You're scratching down the back of the sofa looking for shillings and farthings, and you're completely ignoring that big stack of £50 notes on the coffee table. I'll give you a couple of figures, if I may, which are accurate and fact-checkable, unlike yours. Take the UK TI Inward Investment Report, the last published one. The EU 27 countries invested £400 billion into the UK economy in one single year in 2015-16. A report came out yesterday, a study. Freedom of movement generates £328 million a day into the United Kingdom economy through EU workers' contributions to the economy. That's another $20 billion a year. You're faffing around with about $8.5 billion or $10 billion here or there. The big money is in the benefits that we used to receive. You've convinced the country to give up.
Jason, I've never heard such baloney or heard such spurious statistics in all my life. We do not need to be members of a political union to buy and sell goods from each other or to choose what foreign workers we need for our economy. And unlike your spurious nonsense, what I've quoted you is the government pink book statistics, which shows we pay a net £10 billion every single year as a membership fee to this union. And you can argue, if you like, that that's not a big sum of money compared to many other things. But I tell you what, with that money, you could build a really good, big, brand new district general hospital every single week in this country. The arguments that you've put are the arguments that were put by the Remain side in the referendum. They don't work. Surely, Jason, what is wrong with us coming to an equitable deal with the European Union on assets and liabilities and just getting on trading freely with each other without being in political union?
Call that bigger spirits. Have a look at the United Kingdom Trade Ministry Inward Investment Report. You'll see that the inward investment from the EU 27 was about $400 billion in 2015. That's fact-checkable information. Anybody can use the internet and get it. Do not call my figure spurious when you're talking about a £10 billion net figure, when it's not. You can look at the HM Treasury, contributions to the European Union. It breaks it down piece by piece. The net figure is $8.4 billion. You can double-check and cross-check that with the EU budget to see if they say they received. You're banging on about incorrect numbers, and you're calling my numbers spurious. All of mine are fact-checkable. So thank you, Americans as well.
Jason, if you honestly think that inward investment to the United Kingdom in 2015 from the European Union was $400 billion, you're more deluded than Jean-Claude Juncker, and I will have as big a bet as I can possibly muster that you're wrong by a very, very large factor, and we will take your figure and we'll fact check it and we'll get it on the LBC website within a few minutes of this programme ending. Thank you. And I'm now going to a part of the European Union that votes in UK elections, and it's called Gibraltar. And Chris is calling me from there.
Good evening, Nigel. I voted Remain with the vast majority of the people here. Of course, not everyone did, but the majority did. And now that the deed has been done and the motion has been passed and the people have spoken, I mean, I'm quite looking forward to it, to be honest with you. I did have a bit of a knot in my stomach on the voting day, and for a moment there, I nearly changed my mind. But I'll tell you this, and I want to say this to your listeners, to those people who are listening to the show tonight, who are concerned about the future of the UK. Let me tell you this: Gibraltar came into the EU in 1973 as being part of the UK. At that time, the frontier with Spain was closed, and it opened again in 1982 as a condition of Spain joining the EU. And I can tell you that during the time that the frontier was closed, Gibraltar struggled. It was tough, but we survived. These days, Gibraltar isn't part of the customs union. We're not part of the Schengen agreement. In fact, we don't have an open border because clearly, I mean, we've had 2-hour border queues tonight of people who, Spanish people and Gibraltarians alike, working here and living in Spain, and they've had to wait 2 hours to travel 1 meter to get home. So we don't enjoy the open borders like the rest of the EU do. Now, this is the situation at the moment before we've left the EU. So if we've survived, the UK will. And on that note, the UK has been around a hell of a lot longer than the EU has. There's no reason to think for a moment that the UK won't survive without the EU.
No, I mean, Chris, you're quite right. Gibraltar is only a member of the European Union in name, and actually, the deal that Gibraltar has with the European Union, maybe that's the one the United Kingdom needs with the European Union, where there are reasonable border checks, as long as they're reasonable, and where your tax rates aren't set outside, where you don't need to have VAT, where you can market yourself to consumers from all over the world who come by cruise liner to Gibraltar. You've got a remarkable deal with the European Union, and I hope the Spanish play a bit fairer with Gibraltar than they have in the past, and that was the case whether they were or were not EU members. But a very interesting, unique perspective, I think, on European Union membership comes from Gibraltar. I wonder what Cosmin in Tower Hamlets thinks.
Hello, Nigel. I have a question about, I don't think I've ever heard you talk about this, but I've listened to the Prime Minister mention a few times that it is in Britain's interest to have a strong and a prosperous European Union. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's the line the government are putting out. I would argue this. If the government position now is that it's good for the UK to leave the European Union because we get back our democratic rights of self-government, we get back the ability to control our borders, and we're freed to make our own deals with the rest of the world, why on earth would we deny those privileges to our next-door neighbours who we say are our friends? And my view is very different to Theresa May's. I take the view that the European Union wasn't just bad for Britain. I think it's now bad for Europe. I want Europe to leave the European Union, and I want a European cooperation based on democratic nation states that trade together, are friends together, but are not governed by unelected people like Mr. Juncker. That's my view, Cosmin. What's yours?
Well, my view personally is that the European continent has grown very much, and like economically, it's been developing very much because of the European Union. I'm trying to imagine how Europe would have looked like today if over the past 50 years we would have had closed borders, fees and taxes on trading every little thing, fees on the movement of capital, fees on the movement of goods and services, separate regulations, each country with its own regulations, and then each country who wants to play in another market having to basically adapt to each and every one of those 27 other regulatory environments. How would the European economy and the European continent would have looked like under those circumstances, apart of how it looks today?
Cosmin, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're confusing the European Union today and the world today with what it was. Tariffs and barriers to trade have come down, not just in the European Union, but right across the world over the course of the last 40 years. It's been part of the change that we saw in the late 20th century. It happened within the European Union, and it happened not just because of the European Union, it happened because that process was happening right across the world. Nick Mark says on Facebook, absolutely right, Nigel, we're shareholders, so let's cash in and get out once and for all. David Glickman says the European Union will cease to exist when Le Pen wins. Well, David, we'll see about that in a future programme. My final thought on this is, like all divorces, this needs to be a fair deal for both sides. We need to have a proper, rational assessment of our costs, assets and liabilities. But by asking for 50 billion sterling after we leave. Jean-Claude Juncker is taking the mickey. We need to stand up and start getting tough. Mrs May needs to say, we're going to stop paying into this budget until you sit down round the table with us and we can work out a proper long-term deal. I want us to be fair, but to quote a former Prime Minister, we want our money back. You've been listening to Nigel Farage.